Where does money truly come from? It's not just coins or bills. It's about who controls the system itself. Beneath America's financial system lies a private network, older and more powerful than most governments. This network was born in secrecy, on a secluded island funded by names like Rockefeller, Morgan, and Rothschild. Their goal: centralized financial power, shaping the nation's destiny from the shadows. The story doesn't end with banks or boardrooms. It leads to hidden histories, even to giant bones said to be buried beneath the surface. What else has been hidden by those who shape our reality? In 1910, a secret train carried 6 of America's wealthiest men to Jekyll Island, Georgia. Disguised as hunters, they drafted a plan to control the nation's money, the blueprint for the Federal Reserve. Their meeting was hidden from the public, their motives masked as reform. Jekyll Island itself was built on older secrets, a sacred burial ground, later a Rockefeller estate. Whispers tell of extraordinary discoveries beneath its soil, hinting at a deeper story of concealment. The Federal Reserve's origins are intertwined with the island's mysterious past. What else lies buried beneath the surface? In late 1910, 6 powerful men boarded a blacked-out train, their identities hidden, their mission clear. They arrived at Jekyll Island, an exclusive retreat owned by America's elite. For 9 days, isolated from the world, they drafted a plan to overhaul the nation's banking system. Their goal: create a central bank that appeared federal but was privately controlled. The island's staff were sent away, ensuring total secrecy. The public wanted reform, but these men saw a chance to consolidate power. Their club meeting was, in truth, a silent financial coup. America's money supply would soon be in their hands. The Jekyll Island group were more than bankers, they were visionaries of a new financial order. Paul Warburg brought the blueprint for a central bank. Frank Vanderlip and Henry Davison ensured the interests of the biggest banks. Their debates shaped a system that could create money, set rates, and control the economy without democratic oversight. The plan was deeply unpopular, so secrecy was essential. If the public knew bankers wrote the bill, it would never pass. Their work was laundered, its true origins hidden. The foundation of America's financial future was set in secret. After 9 days, the conspirators left Jekyll Island with the Aldrich Plan, a blueprint for the Federal Reserve. They disguised it as public policy, but its roots were private. The plan faced resistance, but with political shifts and clever rebranding, it returned as the Federal Reserve Act. Passed during the Christmas holidays, it became law in 1913. The Federal Reserve was born, a central bank controlled by private interests, not the government. The men of Jekyll Island had achieved their goal: control over America's money. How has a system with such secretive origins survived and thrived for over a century? The answer lies in the power of hidden hands. The name itself is a masterpiece of public relations, the Federal Reserve System. It sounds official, it sounds governmental, it sounds like it belongs to the people of the United States. Yet this carefully chosen name masks a starkly different reality. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It is no more federal than Federal Express. It is a private entity, a cartel of 12 regional banks, each one a privately owned corporation. Its employees are not civil servants. Its vast, imposing buildings sit on private land. This is the first and most fundamental deception upon which the entire structure is built. A calculated misdirection designed to quell public suspicion from the very beginning. So, who are the owners? Who are the shareholders of these 12 powerful regional banks? The answer is as simple as it is unsettling. The owners are the very same commercial banks that the Federal Reserve is supposed to regulate. A bank operating within a specific region, such as Bank of America or J.P. Morgan Chase, is required to purchase shares in its regional Federal Reserve Bank. This creates a glaring and undeniable conflict of interest. The institutions being policed are, in fact, the owners of the police force. It is not a system designed for genuine oversight. It is a system designed by bankers for bankers to protect the interests of the banking industry above all else. This structure ensures that the immense profits generated by the central bank flow not to the public treasury, but back to its private member banks. In 2023 alone, the Federal Reserve distributed billions of dollars in dividends to its shareholders. This is money created from its open market operations, money that could have been used to fund public services or reduce the national debt. Instead, it is channeled directly into the coffers of the financial institutions that form the cartel. The system operates as a closed loop, a self-perpetuating mechanism for enriching the already wealthy, all under the guise of public service and financial stability. The lines are not just blurred, they have been deliberately erased. the question of ownership goes deeper than just shares and dividends. It speaks to the core of control. For over a century, the leadership of the Federal Reserve has been drawn from the same pool of Wall Street insiders and elite academics who are ideologically aligned with the big banks. Men like Benjamin Strong, a J.P. Morgan lieutenant and Jekyll Island attendee, set the precedent. He became the first governor of the most powerful branch, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, ensuring the Morgan interests were protected. This revolving door between Wall Street and the Fed continues to this day, ensuring that the fox is not just guarding the henhouse. He designed it, owns it, and collects rent from the chickens. To maintain its public legitimacy, the Federal Reserve is draped in the trappings of government accountability. Its chairman is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. He or she testifies before Congress, answering questions about monetary policy and the state of the economy. This creates a powerful illusion of democratic oversight, a theatrical performance designed to reassure the public that their interests are being represented. We see the hearings on television, we read the reports in the newspapers, it all appears to be a transparent process. But this public-facing accountability is a thin veneer, concealing a much deeper autonomous power that operates largely beyond the reach of elected officials. The truth is that the Federal Reserve's most critical decisions are made behind closed doors by its Federal Open Market Committee. They are not subject to the approval of the President or Congress. The Fed has the unique power to create money from nothing, to buy government debt, and to set the interest rates that affect every single citizen, business, and even foreign government. This power is wielded independently. While Congress can question the Fed's chairman, it cannot dictate policy. The institution is designed to be insulated from the political process, which in practice means it is insulated from the will of the people. It is a government unto itself, with a power that no monarch ever wielded. Where does oversight end and true ownership begin? The answer lies in who ultimately benefits from the Fed's actions. When the system faces a crisis, as it did in 2008, the Federal Reserve acts not as a servant of the public, but as a protector of its member banks. It created trillions of dollars to bail out the very institutions whose reckless behavior caused the crisis in the first place. The profits were privatized, but the losses were socialized, passed on to the taxpayer in the form of debt and inflation. This is not the action of a neutral government regulator, it is the action of a cartel protecting its own members at the expense of everyone else. This fundamental design flaw, this inherent conflict of interest, was not an accident. It was the deliberate intention of the men who gathered on Jekyll Island. They sought to create a system that would give them control over the nation's money supply. A system that would allow them to privatize profits and socialize risks. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The Federal Reserve stands today as a monument to their ingenuity and their cynicism. It is a private institution that has the power of a government, but the accountability of a secret society, a society whose first allegiance is to its owners, not to the public. The power of the Federal Reserve does not stop at America's borders. It extends across the entire globe, touching every market and influencing every economy. The United States dollar is not just America's currency, it is the world's reserve currency. Oil is priced in dollars. International trade is settled in dollars. Foreign governments hold vast reserves of dollars to stabilize their own economies. This global dominance gives the Federal Reserve a unique and honestly terrifying power. It means that the decisions made in a private boardroom in Washington do not just affect Main Street United States of America. They can create booms or busts on a planetary scale, shaking the very foundations of the global financial system with the flick of a switch. This system was not an accident. It was cemented at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, where the United States dollar, then backed by gold, was crowned the undisputed king of world currencies. Even after the gold standard was abandoned in 1971, the dollar's reign continued, propped up by geopolitical agreements and the sheer size of the American economy. This gives the United States what has been called an exorbitant privilege. It can print the money that the rest of the world needs, allowing it to run massive trade deficits and finance its national debt with relative ease. It is a form of financial empire, one that does not require armies and occupations, but is maintained through monetary control. When the Federal Reserve decides to raise interest rates to combat inflation at home, the consequences ripple outwards with devastating force. For developing nations that have borrowed money in United States dollars, this single policy decision can be catastrophic. Suddenly, their debt burdens become heavier, the interest payments more crippling. Capital flees their markets, seeking the higher returns available in the United States. Their own currencies plummet in value, making essential imports like food and fuel impossibly expensive. From the bustling streets of Nairobi to the sprawling cities of New Delhi, the Fed's actions can push entire countries towards the brink of economic collapse, a quiet form of warfare waged with interest rates. This global dollar game creates a cycle of dependency and control. Nations are trapped, forced to play by rules set by a private American institution over which they have no influence. They must acquire dollars to service their debt, which often means adopting policies favorable to United States corporate and financial interests. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, institutions heavily influenced by the United States, enforce this discipline. It is a subtle but incredibly effective mechanism for projecting power, ensuring that the global economic order remains aligned with the objectives of those who control the dollar. The Fed is not just a central bank, it is a global economic governor. So, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of this high-stakes game of monetary musical chairs? When the music of cheap credit is playing, international banks and investors reap enormous profits by lending United States dollars to emerging markets hungry for capital. They fund grand infrastructure projects, speculate on local assets, and enjoy high returns in a risk-friendly environment. But when the Federal Reserve changes the tune, raising rates and tightening the money supply, these same players are the first to pull their money out, often triggering the very crises they helped to inflate. They are protected, their assets safely repatriated, while the debtor nations are left to face the devastating consequences of the inevitable bust. The system creates a perverse incentive structure. The bankers who facilitate the loans know that, in a worst-case scenario, their own institutions will likely be deemed too big to fail. The Federal Reserve, along with the IMF, will step in to manage the crisis, often providing bailout loans. But these rescue packages come with strings attached. Demands for austerity, privatization, and deregulation that force debtor nations to sell off their public assets at bargain basement prices. International corporations and financiers can then sweep in to pick up the pieces, acquiring valuable resources and industries for a fraction of their true worth. It is a cycle of manufactured crisis and predatory recovery. This is not a system designed for global prosperity or stability. It is a system designed to concentrate wealth and power. The constant ebb and flow of the United States dollar creates volatility, and in that volatility lies immense opportunity for those with the capital and connections to exploit it. The true winners are the elite international financiers, the multinational corporations, and the geopolitical strategists who understand how to play the game. They thrive on the instability, profiting from both the booms and the busts. The losers are the ordinary citizens of countries caught in the crossfire. Their savings, jobs, and futures sacrificed to maintain a system that serves a powerful few. And what happens when the music finally stops for good? What happens if the world decides it no longer wants to play the dollar game? This is the ultimate question haunting the architects of the system. The rise of alternative currencies and trading blocks signals a growing discontent with the dollar's dominance. A shift away from the dollar would spell the end of America's exorbitant privilege and could trigger a catastrophic crisis for the United States economy, which is dependent on the world's appetite for its debt and currency. The frantic efforts to preserve the dollar's status are not just about economics. They are about preserving an empire of control that was born in secret a century ago. The story of Jekyll Island did not begin with the arrival of the bankers in 1910. Long before it became a sanctuary for the architects of finance, the island held a different, more ancient significance. Its original name, as known by the indigenous Creek people, was a testament to its sacred nature. Indian Mound. It was a place of reverence, a consecrated burial ground where generations of their ancestors were laid to rest. This layer of history adds a profound and unsettling resonance to the events that would later unfold there. The ground upon which a new financial order was conceived was already steeped in the memory of a supplanted people, a place where one world was buried to make way for another. Later, during the Gilded Age, the island was purchased by a consortium of America's wealthiest families, transforming it from a sacred resting place into an exclusive winter paradise. It became the Rockefellers' private estate, a symbol of immense, consolidated wealth. The manicured lawns, opulent clubhouses, and pristine hunting trails were built directly atop this ancient necropolis. The irony is staggering. It was a place where the preservation of dynastic wealth was paramount, a fortress built to protect the legacies of the new industrial kings. Yet in the process of preserving their own heritage, another, far older one was disturbed, covered over, and ultimately, silenced. The ghosts of the island are not just those of Creek chieftains, but of a history deliberately ignored. Beneath the polished veneer of the Millionaires' Club, beneath the golf courses and manicured trails, whispers of a different kind of secret began to surface. These were not rumors of financial conspiracy, but of something far more tangible and astonishing found within the island's soil. Fragmented accounts and local legends spoke of discoveries made during the construction of these grand estates. They told of something unearthed that was much larger than the expected remains of the island's former inhabitants. The whispers were of bones, giant bones, a forgotten chapter of history, literally buried beneath the foundations of the new American aristocracy. These were not isolated tales. Newspaper clippings from the 1800s, scattered across various local archives in the region, reported on the unearthing of anomalous skeletons. These accounts, written in the matter-of-fact language of the time, described human remains of astonishing size, some allegedly measuring between 12 and 18 feet in height. These discoveries were reported, occasionally logged in local records, and then, almost without exception, they seemed to vanish from the historical and archaeological record. The bones disappeared, the stories faded into folklore, and the island's new identity as a playground for the elite took precedence, burying the truth under a century of silence. The disappearance of such monumental evidence raises a deeply troubling question. If these reports of giant skeletons were merely hoaxes or journalistic exaggerations, as modern debunkers often claim, why the need for such a thorough and systematic cover-up? A simple hoax is exposed and then forgotten. It does not require a sustained effort of suppression over decades. The pattern of discovery, followed by official confiscation and subsequent disappearance, suggests a different motive. It points not to the dismissal of a falsehood, but to the deliberate concealment of an inconvenient truth, a truth that could fundamentally rewrite our understanding of the past. Consider the context. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of intense scientific and institutional consolidation in America. The Smithsonian Institution, heavily funded by the very same circles of industrial and financial power represented by the Jekyll Island Club members, was actively standardizing the narrative of American history. An established Darwinian view of human evolution and a specific, linear story of Native American history were being cemented into the academic consensus. The discovery of a race of giant, highly sophisticated beings in North America would have shattered this carefully constructed paradigm, creating chaos within the halls of institutional science. The men who gathered on Jekyll Island were not just bankers, they were masters of narrative control. They understood that power is derived not only from controlling money, but also from controlling the story, the accepted history of a nation. The same impulse that drove them to secretly rewrite America's financial future could easily extend to editing its ancient past. A history that includes giants is a history that is unpredictable, mysterious, and difficult to control. A history that follows a straight evolutionary line, however, is one that reinforces the idea of progress, culminating in the very civilization that they themselves dominated and sought to command. Thus, one question lingers, casting a long shadow over the manicured lawns of Jekyll Island and the marble halls of the Federal Reserve. What else was buried? The connection between the financial coup and the archaeological cover-up is not one of direct, documented conspiracy, but of a shared mindset. It is a mindset of elite control, of shaping reality to fit a desired narrative, and of burying anything that contradicts it. The giants, whether real or symbolic, represent a profound truth that was deemed too disruptive for public consumption. Their erasure from history serves as a chilling reminder that those who have the power to create money also have the power to create silence. They call it Smith's Onion, a cynical play on the name of the most powerful historical institution in America, the Smithsonian. The metaphor is painfully apparent. To investigate the mystery of America's giants is to peel back the layers of a rotten onion. Each layer you remove exposes another, more pungent layer of denial, misdirection, and carefully curated silence. You start with the official story. There were no giants, it is all a myth, a collection of newspaper hoaxes from a less discerning time. But as you peel that first layer away, you find something far more substantial and harder to dismiss. You find a pattern of widespread, documented reports that cannot be so easily explained away by simple mockery. Beneath the veneer of official debunking lies a startling body of evidence. We are not talking about a handful of isolated fanciful tales. The historical record reveals over 100 distinct and documented reports of giant skeletons being unearthed across the vast expanse of North America, from New York to California, from the Ohio Valley to the Deep South. These were not just whispers. They were accounts published in local newspapers, recorded in town histories, and sometimes even noted in the initial field reports of professional archaeologists. Yet, when you search for this evidence today, you are met with a curious and profound emptiness. It seems to have been systematically erased from the collective memory. Where did all the evidence go? You search the archives of our most prestigious museums, expecting to find at least a femur, a skull, or a photograph. Instead, you find nothing. There are no public displays. There are no official catalog entries in the accessible archives. The trail runs cold, vanishing into a bureaucratic fog. When formal inquiries are made, the responses are consistently evasive. The answer is always the same: the bones were lost, they were misidentified, they never existed in the first place. You are presented with redacted documents, inexplicable gaps in collection records, and a strange, almost aggressive institutional silence that feels less like scholarship and more like a carefully managed cover-up. This systematic disappearance of evidence is the core of the onion. It is one thing to debate the interpretation of a discovery, but it is another thing entirely to make the discovery itself vanish. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. A farmer plowing his field unearths a skeleton of incredible size. The local paper reports it. An official from a museum or government agency arrives, takes possession of the remains for further study, and they are never seen or heard from again. This story repeats, time and again, creating a compelling narrative not of a hoax, but of a deliberate and successful campaign to scrub a chapter from American history. The silence itself becomes the evidence. The erasure of the giants from our history books is made all the more conspicuous by the figures who once spoke of them. This was not always a fringe belief confined to the realm of sensationalism. Even Abraham Lincoln, a man not known for his flights of fancy, once made a reference that now seems startling. In a speech describing the grandeur of Niagara Falls, he spoke of the long sweep of time, musing on the eyes that had seen it before him, from the mammoth and mastodon to a race of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America. For Lincoln, this was not a controversial statement, but a commonly accepted piece of the continent's deep and mysterious past. So why the change? Why would a reality acknowledged by a figure like Lincoln be so thoroughly expunged from the national consciousness just a few decades later? The question forces us to look at who controls the narrative, who gets to decide what is history and what is myth. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were the period when the story of America was being formally written, when institutions like the Smithsonian were tasked with creating a single, coherent, and authoritative version of the past. A past that included a vanquished race of giants did not fit the preferred narrative of manifest destiny and linear progress. It was a detail that was too complicated, too disruptive. The process of erasing them was subtle but effective. It was a war of academic attrition. The evidence was collected and then conveniently lost. The reports were dismissed as the work of untrained amateurs. A new generation of archaeologists trained in the dogma of a sanctioned history was taught to ridicule such claims. Over time, the subject became taboo, a career killer for any serious academic. To speak of giants was to brand oneself as a crank. This academic pressure, combined with the physical disappearance of the skeletons, created a feedback loop of denial. The absence of evidence was used as proof of absence, a perfect circular argument. In the end, we are left with a ghost in the historical machine, a phantom narrative that refuses to die completely. Who decides what we are allowed to remember and what we are told to forget? The gatekeepers of history, the institutions that curate our past, hold immense power. They can shape our understanding of who we are and where we come from. The story of the giants suggests that this power has been used not just to interpret history, but to edit it, to remove the chapters that do not fit the desired story. It is the ultimate act of obfuscation, to convince the world that something which was once widely known never even existed at all. What happens when the power to create money, the power to write history, and the power to define scientific truth are all concentrated in the same hands? The question is not merely academic, it is, honestly, the central dilemma of our modern age. we begin to see the emergence of a closed system, a self-referencing loop where each part reinforces the others. The lines between finance, education, and accepted fact begin to dissolve, creating a carefully constructed reality that serves the interests of its architects. When a single network of influence can shape these three fundamental pillars of society, we are no longer living in a history that unfolds organically. We are living within a story that has been deliberately written for us. Consider the flow of influence. The Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel born from the secret meeting on Jekyll Island, prints the money. This is not just currency, it is in fact the lifeblood of the entire system. This financial power allows its beneficiaries, the international banks and the dynastic families behind them, to fund the institutions that shape our minds. They provide enormous endowments to universities, fund research grants, and sponsor academic chairs. In doing so, they can subtly guide the direction of scholarship, promoting theories that support their worldview and marginalizing those that challenge it. The schools, in turn, write the textbooks that teach the next generation what to believe about economics, government, and history itself. Simultaneously, this same network of wealth extends its reach into the cultural sphere, shaping our perception of the past. The great museums and cultural institutions, including the venerable Smithsonian, rely heavily on the patronage of these same elite families and their corporate foundations. These institutions become the official curators of the past, the gatekeepers who decide which artifacts are displayed and which stories are told. They have the power to elevate one narrative to the status of historical fact, while relegating another to the dustbin of myth and conspiracy. The choices they make are not always driven by pure academic curiosity, but can be influenced by the agendas of their powerful benefactors. This creates a powerful feedback loop of control. The money funds the schools that produce the experts. The experts validate the historical narrative promoted by the museums. The museums in turn reinforce the legitimacy of the entire system, creating a public consensus that accepts the status quo without question. Any dissenting voice, whether it challenges the nature of our money or the official version of our past, is easily dismissed as uneducated, unscientific, or irrational. The system polices itself, not through overt force but through the quiet, pervasive power of institutional authority, an authority that it has itself created and funded. When this feedback loop is complete, reality ceases to be something we discover through independent inquiry. Instead, it becomes a design, a meticulously crafted narrative presented to us as objective truth. The story we are told is one of steady progress, of enlightened institutions guiding humanity towards a better future. In this story, the Federal Reserve is a necessary tool for economic stability. Our history is a clear progression from primitivism to modernity, and science is a pure, unbiased search for knowledge. Contradictory data points like the private origins of the Fed or the documented accounts of giant skeletons are simply edited out because they do not fit the plot. The consequences of living within such a design story are profound. It breeds a subtle form of intellectual passivity. When we are taught from a young age to trust the experts and the institutions they represent, we are discouraged from asking fundamental questions. Why question the financial system when the university economics departments endorse it? Why investigate historical anomalies when the museums assure us they are nothing but folklore? Why challenge a scientific paradigm when the leading journals have declared a consensus? Curiosity becomes a liability, and skepticism is recast as a form of social deviance. We learn to accept the story because, honestly, questioning it is simply too difficult. This manufactured reality is incredibly resilient. It is protected by a fortress of academic credentials, institutional prestige, and media validation, all of which are underwritten by the same sources of financial power. The financial system prints the money that pays the salaries of the professors who debunk the conspiracy theories on the news channels that are owned by the corporations that profit from the financial system. It is an echo chamber of immense scale and sophistication. The story becomes the history, and the history becomes the unquestionable truth, not because it is rigorously proven, but because all official sources have been aligned to agree with one another. The ultimate question then is this: what if the story is wrong? What if the reality we have been sold is not a discovery, but a product? If the same hands that manipulate global markets have also curated our history books and defined the boundaries of acceptable scientific thought, then we must consider the possibility that we have been fundamentally misled. We must entertain the idea that the world is not as it seems, and that the most important truths are not the ones displayed in museums or taught in schools, but the ones that have been deliberately buried, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with the courage to look past the official story. The official storytellers and fact-checkers of the internet are quick to dismiss these narratives. Reuters, the global news agency, confidently labels the giant skeleton story as a piece of satire, a clever fiction not to be taken seriously. Snopes, the self-appointed arbiter of online truth, categorizes the entire phenomenon as an elaborate and persistent hoax. This is the first line of defense for the established narrative. By branding these accounts as fake, they are immediately pushed to the fringes, making any further inquiry seem foolish or irrational. It is a powerful and effective strategy for shutting down conversation before it can even begin. We are encouraged to laugh it off, to accept the verdict of the authorities, and to move on without a second thought. Fair enough, we must concede that some of the more sensational claims are indeed fake. The digital age has made it easy to manipulate images and fabricate stories, and it would be naive to accept every piece of information we encounter online as genuine. But this is where the professional debunker's job often ends, and where true investigation must begin. They seize upon the most obvious fakes, hold them up as representative of the entire subject, and declare the case closed. This is not genuine skepticism. It is a calculated tactic of misdirection, using a few false examples to discredit a much larger and more complex body of evidence that is not so easily dismissed. What about the evidence that cannot be explained away as a Photoshop creation or a satirical article? What about the court affidavits sworn under penalty of perjury by individuals who claim to have witnessed these discoveries firsthand? What about the official local coroner reports from the 19th century, which documented the unearthing of human remains of extraordinary proportions? And most compellingly, what about the Smithsonian's own internal field notes and acquisition ledgers, which contain tantalizing references to these giant skeletons before they mysteriously vanished from the records? These are not hoaxes. They are historical documents that demand serious scrutiny, not blanket dismissal. To dismiss everything, to throw out the documented evidence along with the obvious fakes, is not an act of critical thinking. It is an act of intellectual obedience. It is surrendering your own curiosity to the authority of institutions that have a vested interest in maintaining a particular version of history. True skepticism requires questioning everything, including the official debunking itself. It demands that we look at the primary sources, that we acknowledge the inconvenient data, and that we ask why the official narrative requires such a strenuous and ongoing effort to defend it from these persistent nagging questions from the past. The nature of the official rebuttal often reveals more than the rebuttal itself. Notice how the tone is frequently one of ridicule and condescension. Those who pursue these lines of inquiry are not engaged with on their evidence, but are instead labeled as conspiracy theorists or gullible fools. This is an appeal to social pressure, not to logic. It is a way of making the subject taboo, of making people afraid to ask questions for fear of being ostracized or mocked. When an argument cannot stand on its own merits, it must be propped up by ridicule. This aggressive and dismissive stance should be a red flag for any genuine seeker of truth. Furthermore, the loudest debunking often serves a specific purpose: to hide the quietest truth. It acts as a smokescreen, a wall of noise designed to distract from the core of the mystery. By focusing attention on hoaxes, it prevents a more dangerous conversation. A conversation about the documented pattern of discovery, confiscation, and disappearance. The architects of the official narrative know that if the public examined the hundreds of historical accounts and institutional suppression, the established version of history would begin to look very fragile indeed. The debunking is not about clarifying truth, it is about managing perception. The pattern is a classic case of hiding in plain sight. The evidence is, in many cases, part of the public record, buried in dusty county archives, old newspaper microfilms, and forgotten town histories. It is not a secret, but it has been made obscure. It requires effort to uncover, and the institutions of authority are banking on the fact that most people won't make that effort. It is far easier to accept the simple, pre-packaged answer provided by a fact-checking website than engage in painstaking primary source research. The system of control relies on this intellectual inertia, this willingness to accept easy answers over difficult truth. Ultimately, we must understand that sometimes, the very act of debunking is part of the cover-up. It is the final layer of protection for a secret that must not be revealed. When an institution with immense power goes to great lengths to discredit a story, we should not assume the story is false. We should instead become intensely curious about why they are trying so hard. The loudest shouting is often intended to drown out the quietest whisper, and it is in that whisper, the persistent nagging evidence of something that should not exist, that the real story often lies waiting to be heard. This journey through the shadows of history, from the secret birth of a financial system to the buried bones of giants, is not intended as a demand for belief. You're not being asked to accept this narrative as the final, absolute truth. Instead, this is a call to action of a different kind. It is a call to question. It is an invitation to embrace a radical form of skepticism, one that is not satisfied with easy answers or official pronouncements. It is a challenge to look beyond the polished surface of the world we are presented with and to dare to ask what might lie beneath. The story of the Federal Reserve and the giants is a case study in how power can shape reality itself. We live in an age saturated with information, yet genuine understanding can feel more elusive than ever. We are told what to think by a chorus of authoritative voices, from news anchors and academics to fact-checkers and politicians. They present a world that is neat, knowable, and largely settled. But inconvenient truths, those that challenge powerful interests or disrupt established narratives, are rarely given a primetime slot. They will not be televised. They will not be the subject of a government-funded documentary. They are relegated to the margins, labeled as misinformation or conspiracy, not because they are necessarily false, but because they are profoundly inconvenient to the status quo. The very existence of such a coordinated effort to control the narrative should be the starting point for our curiosity. If power truly had nothing to hide, it would not fear inquiry. It would welcome debate and scrutiny, confident in the strength of its own position. But when power reacts to questions with ridicule, censorship, and aggressive denial, it reveals a deep-seated insecurity. It tells us that there is something fragile in its story, something that cannot withstand the light of open investigation. The fear of curiosity is the ultimate telltale sign that a secret is being protected, a secret that is deemed too important or too dangerous for the public to discover. Therefore, the path forward is not to blindly accept this story or any other. The path forward is to reclaim your own intellectual sovereignty. It is to adopt the mindset of an investigator, treating every official statement not as a conclusion, but as a clue. It is to understand that the absence of evidence in the mainstream is not always proof of absence, but can be evidence of concealment. When those in power tell you not to look behind the curtain, that is precisely the moment when you should pull it back with all your might. The most important questions are often the ones we are told not to ask. Perhaps the connections laid out here are merely a coincidence. Perhaps the secret meeting on Jekyll Island and the forgotten tales of giant bones are two separate stories, linked only by the strange history of a single piece of land. Perhaps the silencing of one history and the creation of a new financial order are unrelated events, their parallel patterns of secrecy and control being nothing more than a trick of the light. To believe this is the comfortable option. It is the path of least resistance, the one that allows us to return to the simple, prepackaged reality offered to us by the institutions that govern our world. It requires no effort and courts no controversy, but maybe, just maybe, it is not a coincidence. Maybe the same impulse for control, the same desire to shape the world to suit a specific agenda, has been at play in both arenas. Maybe the power to create money out of thin air and the power to erase a race of giants from history are two sides of the same coin, the ultimate power to define reality. If this is even a remote possibility, then the implications are staggering. It suggests that we are living in a world far stranger and more deliberately managed than we could ever imagine. It suggests that the most profound truths about our past and our present are still waiting to be unearthed. The answers, if they exist, will not be handed to us. They are not waiting in a textbook or a museum display. They are buried deep in the soil of history, hidden in the footnotes of forgotten books and the redacted lines of official documents. Finding them requires effort. It requires a willingness to dig. It demands that we challenge our own assumptions and venture into intellectual territories that have been declared off-limits. It is a process of peeling back the layers of obfuscation, one by one, until we get closer to the core of the matter, however unsettling that core may be. This is the ultimate call to action. It is a call to become an archaeologist of hidden knowledge. The answers are worth digging for, not just to satisfy a historical curiosity, but because the truth about our past is inextricably linked to the control of our present and the freedom of our future. When you understand how the story has been written, you can begin to write your own. The digging is not just about finding bones or uncovering financial conspiracies, it is about finding our own power to see the world with clear eyes, free from the narratives designed to control us. The digging is, in itself, an act of liberation.